Well, if you watch any of my videos, you'll know that I always like kind of like the 5 tips about something. So this is another one of those videos, 5 tips about layer styles that you have to know. Okay, and there's lots of little sub tips inside of here, so it might be more than 5, but generally 5 overall tips about layer styles. So let's go ahead, and we're on a layer over here. I'm just going to double click in the blank area of the layer just to open up the layer style dialog. That is not one of the tips, but it is kind of a tip that some people don't know, because a lot of people, you see a little effects icon down here, so you think you have to go down there, but you can actually just double click, not on the layer itself, but on the area outside of here. Just double click there. Opens up the layer style dialog. Okay, so first tip about layer styles is one of the things that you're going to see is for certain layer styles. So when I go over here and I add a drop shadow, okay, and I'm going to increase the size a little bit and increase the distance, and come over here and even increase. I just want you to be able to see it a little bit better. Okay, yeah, let's get that distance up so you can see the little layer style that goes around there. Here, let me zoom in so you can even see it better. So I've added a drop shadow. One of the things, if you ever see that little move tool icon, see a little arrow, that means that you've got something that you can do on the image. So you'll see here, it's changing settings over here in the layer style dialog, but it's letting you move it visually. Okay, so I don't have to figure out what's the exact angle I want. I just come over here and I just reposition it. All right, you'll see that if you come down here from drop shadow, you'll also see that when I come down here to inner shadow, I can do the same thing. And I can turn that one off. When you come to something like outer glow, it shows you a hand. That's kind of like, no, it's stop. You can't do anything because there's really nothing to do with it. Okay, but if you do see anything on there, gradient overlay is another one. You'll see I can reposition the gradient overlay right on there. Okay, all right, so that's one thing about layer styles that I think a lot of people miss, is just the fact that you can do it visually on top of here. All right, let's take a look at another one, and this is something that sneaks by a lot. So I'm going to add a drop shadow. A lot of times I do a drop shadow, and I do it exactly what's on screen here. I don't really want necessarily a shadow. What I want is definition. I want it to take some separation of the text on whatever it's on top of. So take a look. That's before. That's after. So I'll add a very harsh drop shadow. Okay, I'll take the size down to a very, very low setting. Okay, because the higher the size, the softer it gets. So I'll keep the size at a very low setting. I'll take the distance to a very low setting because I want it close. Well, if this is something you do over and over again, there's an option down here, make default. Okay, and what this does is this changes, well, it does exactly what it says. It makes these settings the default. So it's not necessarily it's got a hidden meaning. It's just, if you've used Photoshop for a while, this didn't used to be there. Okay, so this came out with Photoshop CS5, so it was pretty easy to miss. It was just a tiny little thing. It's not a feature that Adobe is necessarily going to go tout. Okay, but you can make these the default, and then the next time that you come in here, I'll click OK. And then if I go and I double click this layer and I click on drop shadow, it automatically set it to what I had before. And then don't forget, you can reset the defaults back to where they were before if you ever need to. Okay, so I can double click and open up my drop shadow and then just hit reset default if I can change basically back to what it was, whatever the default settings were before I made it. Okay, all right, so a couple other layer style things. When you have a layer style added to a layer, what you can do is hold down the Option key on the Mac, that's Alt key on a PC, and I can take this little effects icon and I can click and I can drag. Well, first off, here there's two. I can take the effects icon, I can click and drag it, and I can move it to another layer. Or I can Option or Alt drag it, and it copies it to the other layer. So I don't have to open up the other layer and figure out what settings that I just applied and apply those same settings to it. I can just move and I can drag it to the other layer, so that way I can copy it a lot easier. I don't have to create presets or anything like that. You've got a very easy way to copy it. Another thing that I think sneaks by kind of under the radar with layer styles is the fact that sometimes you might want to, let's say, for example, let's say I wanted to erase part of the layer style on one of the letters in this example here. Okay, and you'll find that sometimes you'll add a drop shadow to something, but you won't really want the drop shadow, like a person, but you only want the shadow under the feet. You won't want it under the rest. So we're going to fake this for a second here. Okay, so I'm going to go under the word style here, and we're going to add a drop. We've added a drop shadow. I'm going to increase the size, increase the distance here, So let's pretend this is a person and we've added a shadow below them, but we only want it under the feet, okay? Not on top here, okay? Sorry, it's could have switched to a person, but it's much more easy to do it with a text layer. What we can do here is if you come right up here to the layer menu, and then you go down to your layer style properties right over here, you're going to see that there's an option that's called create layer. All right. What this does is it takes the layer style that you've created, which is live and indestructible right now. I can always go back and change it. It takes it and it puts it into a regular layer. So see what it's done here? So there is my style. There's the text on top. Now, it doesn't have a live layer style anymore. I can't go back and change this. But now that it is a regular layer here, that means now I can take my eraser tool and I could come up here and, for example, erase the layer style away from the areas that I don't want it and just leave it on the areas that I do. If I just want it down here to make it look like it's resting on top of something, but I don't want to drop shadow all the way going up the sides and up at the top here. Okay, so you have to put it onto another layer. You can't mask a layer style without forcing it to do this. Just know that you can, and also just know that it becomes a regular layer at that point. So you can't go back and edit it. You'd have to add it all over again. And then the other thing about layer styles, last one here, is that I'm going to double click and we've added the layer style up here. Okay. If I go to drop shadow, for example, you'll see it says use global light. Well, what that means is if I come down here and I add a layer style and I click on drop shadow, as I change the angle, look at how the angle of this one changes. I'm working on this layer down here, the bottom layer. Notice how when I change the angle, the lighting angle, it changes for the other one. That's because we have used global light turned on. So the key is if you ever want to change this, if you ever want that shadow to cast the other way but not on top of this one, and it's not just for shadows, it's for glows, it's for bevel and emboss, all these different things, just turn off use global light. Okay, so now I can change the shadow. You can see the shadow falls to the left on this one, but up at the top here it still falls to the right. So if you don't turn that off, then automatically whenever you move one, it's going to change all of your layer styles for you. Whether you know it or not, it's going in there and it's globally changing them unless you turn this one off. Okay, so there you have 5-ish kind of tips for using layer styles. Very, very powerful little tools inside of Photoshop. Once you know some of those tips, they become a lot more powerful. My name's Mac Laskowski, folks. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you again soon.